Okay, so in this example, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of using external data in Grasshopper. There are many different kinds of external data that you can bring in, and they range from using online APIs, text files, Excel spreadsheets, GIS information, external devices, and so on. And equivalently, correspondingly, they could be, for example, the price of gold automated and updated, some text files of some sort of information, more structured Excel spreadsheet information, GIS information, shapefiles, and census data that has been spatialized, or even input from external devices, which relates a little bit to the idea of non-mouse or non-keyboard input. So you could have accelerometer input from an iPhone, you could have GPS input from an iPhone, you could have census tract information, you could have the price of gold. And all of these things kind of have a similarity in the workflow, which is why I'm discussing them all together, even though the way you can mobilize them in order to create your tool may be different. But the technical structure behind getting the data, roughly, although we will use many different modes to do that, can be shared and can be thought of together. So this video will deal a little bit more with the technical end of how to get the data and process it, and then the next video or the subsequent videos will talk about how to then incorporate that data into your tool. So the first task is really finding the data, and that's a little hard. In fact, sometimes the hardest task of data. Just to give a little brief overview, you find the data, you want to import it into Grasshopper, you want to process the data in Grasshopper, and then you want to use it in your tool. And again, finding the data is the hardest part. You have to find who has the data, find it in a readable format, understand that it has good enough information, and oftentimes in the world of data manipulation, or visualization, or calculation, or statistics, this is the hardest part. Where do you get the data from? And really it consists of browsing the web, finding data sets. For example, very recently the New York City has released detailed Pluto data about the census information, census tract information, business information, etc. And on their website, which is an amazing step. Or for example, you could query Citybike in order to find out what the status of their bike stops are, and they also expose that as a single API or a single website as a resource. And so we're very lucky to have those resources, but you could also imagine that there's a lot of information or a lot of data that you wouldn't be able to get. For example, detailed information about traffic data probably is not available due to security reasons. In any case, so grabbing the data is the most important, and I'll actually reorder these so we can talk about them in kind of ascending order of difficulty. You want to have the data, and then you want to import it, and there are various ways to import it. There's using GHAO, our plugin. There's @it, which lets you bring in some shapefiles, or the built-in shapefile reader. There's a file reader. GHAO also has a spreadsheet reader, or a shapefile reader, and so various ways in which we bring the data into Grasshopper. And then the question is how to process it. So you may want to grab all the data and do something with it. For example, maybe you want to filter for, if we're looking at Citybike data, maybe we want to filter to find only those bike stations that have more than 5 bikes parked, so that you get an activity view of where the most stationary bikes are. Or maybe you want to cluster all the bike stations together so you can get a good mental or a good spatial map of the distribution of Citibank stations, because there are high density locations, low density locations, and clustering is a way to kind of easily map the general zones of Citibank usage rather than the specific stations. And then you want to use the data into your tool. So if we're using Citybike data, for example, you could, if you had previously charted out popular paths or popular Citybike locations, and you can imagine that you could connect those paths together and then use this data in order to modify something about, say, the relationship of your building to the passage of bikes. And the more the more we get towards the processing and the usage, the more the tool becomes about what you want to see and the desired result of the tool, and becomes less and less technical and more conceptual, and more rooted in the specifics of your tool.